What if the next breakthrough in human history doesn't start with a telescope pointing outward, but with something out there finally turning its attention toward us? That's the question I couldn't escape the moment I saw the newest data streams pour across my monitor. For months, the world has been watching 3I/Atlas glide through our solar system as if it were nothing more than a harmless interstellar comet. But the truth is far stranger, far more unsettling, and it has forced even scientists like me, people who have spent decades trusting the language of physics, to admit that something is happening out there we never prepared for. You need to understand this from the beginning. When Atlas was first spotted, everything about it seemed routine. A faint object moving on a hyperbolic path, reflecting just enough sunlight to be cataloged. NASA classified it. Observatories confirmed it. Everyone nodded and moved on. But from the moment the data reached my lab, something felt wrong. The numbers didn't line up. Nothing about the light signature made sense. But we pushed those doubts aside, like astrophysicists often do. Convinced our instruments needed calibration, we were wrong. And that mistake may be the most embarrassing moment of my career. Weeks passed and the anomalies multiplied. Atlas wasn't shedding material. It wasn't showing sublimation. It wasn't rotating randomly the way natural objects do. Instead, it held a steady, deliberate orientation, almost as if it was keeping one side aimed toward the sun. Even then, I tried to rationalize it. Maybe it was tumbling too slowly to detect. Maybe the ice content was unusually low. Maybe. But maybe only lasts until the universe decides to slap you in the face. The first red flag came from Chile, when an array detected a sudden spike in heat from the object, far too controlled, too clean, too intentional to be natural. 30 minutes later, a telescope in Hawaii caught a reflection pattern that no comet should ever produce. A rhythmic pulse, evenly spaced, as if light were being redirected in coded intervals. Even then, scientists around the world tried to explain it away. Instrumental error, solar interference, background distortion. We hid behind the lamppost, looking only where we were comfortable looking. But physics doesn't care about your comfort. And the data kept coming. Atlas changed speed. It didn't speed up because of gravitational pull or slow down because of drag. It changed speed because something inside it decided to. Do you know how terrifying that is for a scientist to say out loud? Objects in space do not change velocity spontaneously. They obey Newton, they obey gravity. But Atlas didn't behave like an object. It behaved like a pilot I remember staring at the trajectory log for nearly an hour, rerunning the numbers, convinced there had to be an error. But each recalculation showed the same impossible truth. Atlas wasn't reacting to forces. It was commanding them. A gentle deceleration, too precise to be natural, perfectly timed as it approached the sun. Every shift in orientation matched a flawless mathematical curve, as if it were navigating an invisible flight path. Even then, we told ourselves this was ridiculous. Alien spacecraft? Impossible. We don't jump to science fiction just because we can't explain something, but the universe kept peeling back layers of our denial. When ESA redirected one of its Mars orbiters, the high-resolution scans arrived like a punch to the chest. I will never forget the way the room fell silent. People who had spent their lives studying rocks, dust, gas, debris, just staring, unable to speak. The images showed structure, not random ridges or fractures, not natural crystalline patterns, but deliberate geometry, a repeating network of hexagonal tiles, perfect concentric circles carved into the surface, clean lines, symmetry, purpose. Nature doesn't build like that, not on microscopic scales, and certainly not on something kilometers wide. One of my colleagues whispered, "This is a machine." I wanted to argue, but I couldn't. The evidence was unbearable. The hexagons were too perfect. The circular patterns were too exact. And worse, some of those panels shifted position in real time. When we compared frames, they weren't just reflecting sunlight. They were redirecting it, adjusting, reacting, almost like they were responding to being observed. That was the moment I felt fear, real fear, because an inert object does not respond to surveillance, but the universe wasn't finished breaking us. Spectrographic data came next. This part still gives me chills. The surface of Atlas wasn't rock or ice. It was primarily carbon, but not natural carbon-carbon aligned in patterns identical to synthetic graphene, a material humans only began mastering in recent decades, except this was graphene on a macro scale, organized with atomic precision we couldn't even recreate in a lab. Atlas wasn't just reflecting light, it was harvesting it. Our computers ran simulation after simulation, but nothing made sense. Temperature spikes that should have vaporized a natural object only made Atlas brighter. Instead of overheating, it stabilized, maintaining perfect thermal balance as if it had internal regulation mechanisms. There was no outgassing, no jets, no tail, just controlled energy absorption. This wasn't a comet. This was an engineered surface. And the question grew darker. If it's absorbing energy, what is it preparing for? Then came the maneuver that destroyed the last remnants of skepticism. Atlas reached its perihelion, the closest point to the sun, where any natural object would accelerate dramatically. Instead, it slowed down, deliberately, smoothly, as if hitting cosmic brakes. Not only did it resist the sun's pull, it used the excess energy to pivot and shift into a completely new trajectory, a trajectory that kept it inside our solar system. You have to understand how impossible that is. Interstellar visitors don't stay. They enter on hyperbolic paths and they leave. That's the rule. That's the universe. But Atlas broke the rule with effortless precision. It performed an orbital insertion, gentle, intentional, mathematically perfect, and it settled into a repeating ellipse that would bring it near Earth more than once. Objects do not choose to stay. Something chose for it. For the first time, NASA quietly updated its internal term for Atlas. Not comet, not asteroid, but controlled object of unknown origin. The scientific world pretended not to panic, but behind closed doors, every expert, every physicist, every astronomer knew the same chilling truth. Something out there knows we're here and it isn't leaving. For days after the orbital insertion, every major observatory on Earth turned its full attention toward 3I/Atlas, and the more we looked, the less sense the universe made. Atlas wasn't just moving with intent, it was behaving like something that understood its environment, something that could anticipate forces long before they touched it. Patterns emerged in its light curve, subtle micro-adjustments that aligned perfectly with incoming fluctuations in solar wind, as if it wasn't reacting to the storm of particles, but preparing for them. That was the detail that unnerved me most. Reaction is physics. Preparation is intelligence. But what came next shattered whatever fragile framework of normalcy we had left. As Atlas made its second pass through the inner solar system, a strange glow began to build along its hexagonal surface. At first, observatories assumed it was simply thermal re-radiation, an object absorbing sunlight and emitting infrared like a normal body would, but the intensity pattern was wrong, too uniform, too synchronized. When we enhanced the thermal maps, we saw pulses of energy streaming across its surface in waves, like power being routed through a circuit. Then came the moment we realized the glow wasn't heat, it was communication. A team in Spain compared the pulse sequence to solar flux, but the timing didn't match any natural oscillation. Instead, the pulses aligned with Atlas's own rotational frame, except Atlas wasn't rotating. That meant the pulses weren't generated by movement. They were being emitted from inside, deliberate, patterned, programmable. I remember staring at the graph with my pen frozen in the air, unable to write a single number. These weren't thermal pulses, they were signaling patterns. We weren't watching a space rock, we were watching a system boot up. As more data rolled in, the familiar dread returned. Atlas began shifting its panels, not subtly, but dramatically, rotating entire sections of its exterior, like petals unfolding underneath the outer layer. A faint lattice structure appeared, pulsing with a soft ultraviolet shimmer. That shimmer wasn't random. It came in cycles, 47 seconds apart. The exact same interval found later in the radio transmission. That's when I whispered to myself, it's synchronizing. Everything up to this point could still be dismissed by the most stubborn skeptics. Strange geometry, active thermal control, orbital maneuvering, fine, call them anomalies, call them extreme coincidence. But synchronization, that is intention, and intention demands an intelligence behind it. Even so, the scientific community tried desperately to justify the impossible. Some suggested exotic physics. Others speculated a natural, self-organizing structure or mineral with properties we simply didn't understand, but one by one, every hypothesis collapsed under the weight of new data. Then Atlas did the one thing no natural phenomenon in the cosmos has ever been recorded doing: it changed shape. The first evidence came from an observatory in Argentina. They caught a series of telescope frames showing the hexagonal shell retracting just a fraction of a degree. Too subtle for the untrained eye, but unmistakable to us. Minutes later, the same motion was detected in Japan. And then, almost ceremonially, Atlas expanded one of its circular segments outward like an iris dilating. That was it. The moment denial died. Objects do not reconfigure themselves in real time. Objects do not open. Objects do not breathe. I stood in the control room, frozen, as though watching a chrysalis split open. The inner surface, sleek, dark, faintly luminescent, absorbed sunlight with nearly perfect efficiency, and with each pulse of ultraviolet, we saw the same pattern: a rising curve, a drop, another rise, always in 47-second intervals. Like a heartbeat, I still remember how quiet the room became as the implications settled into our bones. There's a particular kind of silence you hear only when humans confront something beyond comprehension, when the mind races but the body refuses to move. And then the Italian team made a discovery that pushed everything into the realm of undeniable. The reflected sunlight wasn't random. The frequency distribution formed a mathematical sequence, prime numbers embedded in the light signature. They weren't strong enough to form a message on their own, but they were there, woven into the emission pattern like a watermark, a cosmic fingerprint. I wanted to scream, not out of fear, but out of conviction. We weren't misunderstanding the data. We weren't misreading instruments. It was all real. Someone or something had engineered an object capable of adapting, communicating, harvesting energy, and maintaining a stable orbit around our star. But the universe wasn't done surprising us. 3 days later, as Atlas approached conjunction with Mars, the Allen Telescope Array picked up a faint modulation near the hydrogen line, 1.420 gigahertz weak, almost nothing, but unmistakably structured. The signal repeated every 47 seconds. When we plotted it visually, it revealed a spiral, the golden ratio, a signature of life, of art, of intelligence. When SETI confirmed the detection independently, several researchers cried not out of joy, but out of the crushing realization that humanity had just crossed a threshold we were never trained to face. But the most terrifying part wasn't the message, it was the direction of the signal. It wasn't broadcasting outward into the void. It was pointed directly at Earth, as if it knew exactly where we were. Governments went silent. Agencies locked their buildings. Data streams vanished into classified vaults. Public statements were stripped of all substance. But behind that curtain of secrecy, the truth circulated among scientists like a whispered confession. Atlas isn't passing through the solar system, it has arrived. And then came the moment we all feared, the moment that felt less like discovery and more like acknowledgement, like whatever Atlas was had been waiting for us to notice. Atlas shifted its trajectory again. Not a random deviation, not a gravitational perturbation. It aligned itself with Earth's orbital plane perfectly, by choice. For the first time in my life, I felt the weight of a universe that was suddenly aware of us, not indifferent, not distant, but watching and approaching. The moment Atlas aligned itself with Earth's orbital plane, the atmosphere in every scientific facility on the planet shifted. It was no longer just an anomaly, no longer a curiosity. It had taken a step toward us, a deliberate one. And the realization that spread across our community was simple, paralyzing, and absolute. We were no longer observing it. It was approaching. For hours, Atlas drifted in perfect silence, maintaining a calculated distance, close enough to track, far enough to avoid panic. But then, just as it reached its closest projected point along our orbit, something impossible happened. The ultraviolet pulses we had observed for weeks suddenly intensified, not randomly, but rhythmically, each burst sharper and brighter than the last, forming a complex wave sequence. It wasn't noise, it wasn't radiation bleed, it was modulation, it was speaking. The Allen telescope array caught the first coherent transmission. Australia confirmed it, then South Africa. A single narrowband signal at the hydrogen line, repeating with surgical precision, and beneath the prime number pattern we had decoded earlier, a second layer emerged, one we hadn't noticed until the computers isolated it, a waveform that wasn't digital, wasn't binary, wasn't even designed for processing as a message. It was a scan. Atlas wasn't trying to talk to us, it was trying to read us. Across the world, agencies scrambled. The UN went into emergency session. Communicational blackout protocols were activated, but nothing we did mattered. Every 47 seconds, Atlas continued sending its pulses, directed, patient, unbroken. Not loud enough to overwhelm our systems, not aggressive, but persistent testing, probing, learning. And then, at 2:13 UTC, everything stopped. The transmission halted mid-cycle. The ultraviolet pulses froze. The heat signatures flattened into a perfect thermal baseline, as if Atlas were holding its breath. Even the trajectory stabilized into a motionless drift, its orientation locked directly toward Earth. Silence. Real silence. A silence so vast and deliberate that every scientist watching understood the same terrifying truth at the same exact moment. Atlas was waiting. But waiting for what? The answer came not from a radio dish, but from a spectrograph in the Canary Islands. While the object held still, its panels began reflecting sunlight in a new pattern, one we hadn't seen before. When the data was converted into frames, the reflection sequences formed a rotating spiral, mathematically flawless, expanding and contracting with uncanny precision. And hidden inside that spiral was a clear numerical sequence. 0, 1, 1, 2, 3, 5, 8, 13. The Fibonacci sequence. The golden rhythm of galaxies, storms, seashells, DNA, art, life itself. This wasn't a call for help. This wasn't a warning. This wasn't a threat. It was an introduction. I remember gripping the edge of my desk, whispering into the empty room, "It knows how we see the universe." Because that's what the Fibonacci pattern is, not just mathematics, but a bridge between physics and meaning, a way to say, we recognize the same order you do. At dawn, governments reluctantly convened the first multinational response committee. Every proposal, from returning a radio message to sending a directed laser pulse, was met with disagreement, fear, or political paralysis. Meanwhile, Atlas drifted silently, patiently, waiting for the species below it to make a choice. But the most haunting moment came when one of our analysts detected a final layer hidden beneath the reflection data. So faint it took hours to extract a repeating shape embedded in the spectrum, a circle, then a line, then another circle, orbit, transit, observation. It wasn't merely introducing itself, it was telling us what it is, a watcher, a surveyor, a probe built, not to conquer, not to threaten, but to observe. And then came the final twist, the one that made every scientist exhale in disbelief. Because when we overlaid the sequence of circles and lines onto Atlas's orbital ellipse, the pattern matched Earth's orbit perfectly. Atlas hadn't chosen its trajectory at random. It had placed itself into resonance with our world, not to collide, not to hover, to stay, to study, to watch us the way we watch newborn stars, carefully, curiously, cautiously. For the first time since the object entered our solar system, there was no fear in the room, no panic, only awe, quiet, humbling awe, because the message was clear. You are not alone. We have seen you. We are listening. And for the first time in humanity's history, we faced a truth bigger than any civilization, any boundary, any belief. We are part of a universe that is aware. The debate continues now, behind locked doors, whether we should answer, whether silence is safer or communication is destiny, whether a message from Earth will open a dialogue or open a door we are not ready to walk through. But one thing is undeniable. 3I/Atlas didn't come here by accident. It came because someone or something wanted us to know it exists. And it's waiting for us to decide whether we want to be seen. What happens next won't just change science. It will change humanity forever.